Hello, everybody. I'm Brian. I'm the Roanoke Valley Libertarians chair. Today, we're doing an online interview, and we're going to learn about the five-star voting system through equal.vote. If you want to learn more about it, we got Anne Kallen here. She's going to go through the presentation. If anyone comes on and you want to ask any questions, she'll gladly take questions after her presentation. So, Annie, do you have anything to say before you start?
Yeah, I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Anne Kallen. I'm the president of the Equal Vote Coalition. We advocate for a few different voting methods. We'll primarily talk about star voting today. Separately from my work with Equal Vote, I am libertarian. I'm the chair of the Multnomah Libertarians here in Portland, Oregon. But Equal Vote is a nonpartisan organization, so anybody from any political party is welcome to come and help us out and learn more.
All right. Sounds good. So what I'm going to do is I'll pull up your presentation screen.
Okay.
And there you go.
All right. So, like I said, I'm with Equal Vote. And the genesis of Equal Vote came from this notion that your vote should be just as powerful as mine. It doesn't matter who you are, where you live, how many candidates on your side. Mathematically, our votes should weigh the same. And so our mandate is advocating for voting methods that do have this equal mathematical weighting. And I'll kind of explain what that means as we go into it. So first, before we get into the solution, we have to talk about what's the problem. And you're probably familiar with this concept of voting lesser evil, especially, those of us who are part of a third party are often told, don't vote for your favorite candidate because you'll be throwing your vote away. So you're told, vote for your lesser evil. There's usually two front runners, particularly in presidential elections, but you'll find it in a lot of other elections as well. And you're told, pick one of those two to vote for in order to make your vote count for something. And so, why is this the case? Why does this happen? Why do we get pressured into that? So let's look at an example. We like to use Star Wars because everybody knows these characters, hopefully. And in this example, Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader are the front runners. So those would be like the two major party candidates in this election. The stars in this picture represent how much do you like these candidates. And so in this example, you like Princess Leia the best and you would like to vote for her. But because of vote splitting, you're pressured to vote for Luke instead to give him a chance to win and avoid electing your worst case scenario, which is Darth Vader. So you may choose to vote for Leia anyway as like a protest vote, or you may choose to vote for Luke or Yoda in this example. Well, probably not Yoda, Luke, because he's a front runner. And that's a dilemma that we get put into, and it's really not fair that we can't actually say who we want to vote for and have that vote be counted fairly. So vote splitting is what causes this. If there's only two candidates in the race, like the example we see here of just Luke and Darth are in the race, it's a fair election. 60% of the voters prefer Luke, so Luke wins. But on the other side of this slide, you can see, what if more people join from the good guy side? Now that vote gets split between all of these different candidates, and the good guys end up losing, even though in this example, Darth Vader only has 31% of support. So it's the problem where when more people from your side run, you actually get less voting power. And that's the problem we're trying to solve. Am I going too fast, or do you have any questions? All right. So traditional choose one voting is the voting method most people are familiar with. It's where you can mark one candidate on your ballot and that's it. It's known to be gameable. It favors candidates that are perceived as electable, and as a consequence, it leads to unrepresentative winners when there are competitive races with more than 2 candidates. Over time, this gradually results in hyperpolarized 2-party system, which of course we all recognize and are familiar with, because voters are strategically voting for the frontrunner on their side rather than voting their conscience. This results in a lot of toxic rhetoric, demonizing each other, calling the other side evil, because it becomes this all or nothing battle. So the vote splitting is the problem, leading to the spoiler effect, causing people to vote strategically. Some votes are wasted. You get parties that will gatekeep to, pre-decide who they think is the most viable candidate. We saw that with, Bernie Sanders being effectively shut out of the competition. We've seen that, in all of the parties. You get this gatekeeping by people who are in leadership in those parties. This creates increased polarization, 2-party domination. Money in politics has a huge influence because of this. And then there's that electability bias, which tends to favor people who have wealth, name recognition, incumbency, and things like that. So people are not well represented. So what do we want in a voting method? At Equal Vote, we have 5 things that we're looking for. 1, we want the voting method to be easy to use, easy to understand and interpret the results, easy for election officials to tally, easy to implement, and easy to audit. Secondly, we want to make it safe for voters to vote their conscience, which we call, the honesty criteria, where you're able to be honest with your vote. We want it to be expressive so that you can show how much or how little you like the candidates. We want it to be accurate, where the data that you input in the form of your ballot is reflected accurately in the result. And perhaps most importantly for our organization, we want it to be equal. We want to make sure that every voter's vote weighs the same, and that prevents vote splitting and doesn't give anybody an unfair advantage based off of, arbitrary criteria. So you can see from our little chart here that we consider star voting to be the best of all of these worlds. It's right there in the middle. There are other voting methods that we like. Approval voting and ranked robin are great voting methods. We don't advocate for ranked choice voting, which you may have heard of, and we don't advocate for choose one voting, which is the standard voting method throughout much of the US. So what are the different ways that we can vote? There's a yes/no ballot where you can say, thumbs up or thumbs down on all the candidates on your ballot. That's approval voting. You can have a scored ballot where you're scoring the candidates, in this case on a scale of 0 to 5. You can score candidates equally. You can leave candidates blank. There are different ways to tally that. Our preferred method is star voting, which I will explain. And then there's a ranked ballot is another way that you can fill out the ballot. In that case, you usually don't rank people equally. In that case, you're ranking first, second, third, fourth, fifth, your order of preferences. And there are lots of different ways to tabulate a ranked ballot. Like I said, we don't advocate for ranked choice voting, but we do advocate for ranked robin, also known as Condorcet. So the first step is how are you filling out the ballot? And then the second step is how are you tallying it? So this slide here is showing how you might fill out the ballot in different ways. So star voting was invented in 2014. Before I got involved, Equal Vote hosted a conference at the University of Oregon in Eugene, Oregon. And there were experts from around the country that came and debated, talked, discussed, held panels about voting method reform. And out of this conference, there were some discussions, And there were people who were advocates of kind of a more score voting type method and people who were advocates of more ranking methods, particularly ranked choice voting. And they had a lot of debates and discussions. And ultimately, this conversation led to this idea, what if we combined the best of both worlds? What if we took score voting and added an instant runoff to it? And there was some skepticism at first, but they went home, started running simulations, and found that this new hybrid, which we call star voting, actually works better than either of those older voting methods do on their own. And it solves a lot of problems that we see in those other voting methods. So there have since been a lot of studies done that support this consistently. There's a peer-reviewed paper. If you go to our website, you can link to it. This is really well documented that star voting works really well for these things that we're trying to do. Just stop me, Brian, if you have any questions or need clarification on anything.
All right, will do.
All
but
right.
right now, everything's going good.
Okay, great. So let's talk about what is star voting. With star voting, you give your favorite candidate 5 stars, you give your least favorite candidate 0 stars, and you vote your conscience. If you give 2 candidates equal scores, that indicates that you support them equally, and score all the candidates anywhere you want in that range. So the ballots are counted in 2 steps. First is the scoring round, in which we find the 2 highest scoring candidates, and those become finalists. So in this example, Carmen and Blake are the 2 highest scoring candidates overall, so they advance to the next round. And in the automatic runoff, Blake and Carmen go head to head, and we find out which one of those 2 was preferred overall by more voters. So in this example, we see a ballot from a voter where they scored Carmen with a 4, they scored Blake with a 1, so this vote goes to Carmen. You add up all of those votes in the automatic runoff, and then whoever has the most votes wins. And in this case, Carmen had 58% of the votes in that runoff, so Carmen wins. You may notice there's a slice for equal preferences. For any voters that scored Carmen and Blake the same, that counts as an equal preference vote, and it goes equally to both candidates. And this explains the equal preference vote a little bit more. So for example, in this example, you see the first square is showing a sample voter's ballot where they scored Carmen and David the same. In the scoring round, Carmen and David are the finalists. In the automatic runoff, we look at this voter's ballot and we see they scored Carmen and David the same. So that vote becomes an equal preference vote, which is that slice I was talking about.
What would happen if 2 of the candidates was tied for the highest score during the instant runoff?
So that ultimately would be up to the municipality or the organization that was adopting it, how they want to do tiebreakers. We do have a recommended protocol, and the way that works is that if there's a tie in the scoring round, then for those 2 candidates, you see which one was preferred by more voters. And then if there's a tie in the runoff round, you see which one had a higher score. So you're kind of looking at the opposite way of measuring in each case. So that's our recommendation for how to break ties. Sometimes you can get a true tie, especially if there's not very many voters. In that case, it's probably a random tiebreaker is going to be your best bet. But with star voting, you encounter ties a lot less often than you would with standard voting.
Okay.
So the 5-star ballot, it empowers the voter's voice. It allows you to show preference order, but also how strongly you feel about each candidate. So in this example, they love Andre the best, and Carmen and David are second, but they're able to specify not only are Carmen and David second, but they're very close to their best. So they're able to say not just first, second, third, but also how strongly do you feel about that ordering. And in this case, Blake is sort of their third choice, but he's way down there, down by a 1. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you can mark your ballot. It's great for cognitive load because, 6 bubbles is kind of right in the pickle barrel of what people can usually consider in one moment. If you have too many bubbles, if you have 10 or 20 or 40, that can get challenging. So the ballot is always exactly 6 bubbles wide, and it's tallied with addition in both rounds. So using simple addition has a lot of benefits for the way that the results are published and the way that they're tallied. It creates a lot of simplicities. So the top 2 runoff eliminates vote splitting, and the spoiler effect, your ballot is your vote, and your full vote goes to the finalist you prefer. So it's, 1 voter, 1 vote. And if your favorite candidate didn't win, your full vote makes a difference. So now I'm going to switch gears and talk about a different voting method that you may have heard of. This is a different alternative voting method called ranked choice voting, and it has gained some popularity in the last few years. A lot of people don't realize it actually is 150 years old, more than 150 years old at this point. So it's not actually a new thing. It's been around for a long time, and it's been known for a long time that it has some significant flaws. But the way that it works is the voter will rank the candidates in order of preference. In the first round, you count the first choice votes of all the voters to see if any candidate has a majority. If they do not, then the last place candidate is eliminated, and those ballots get moved to their next choice if there is a next choice. And votes that cannot be reallocated are exhausted. They're removed from the election. And that's kind of a key point that is not often well understood by people who are advocating for ranked choice voting. In the second round, the ballots that remain will count as 1 vote for whatever their top ranking is in that round. So for some, that'll be their first. For some, it'll be their second. And if nobody has a majority, then the last place candidate is eliminated. And again, those ballots are reallocated if possible. And they continue this until one candidate has a majority of the remaining ballots. Ranked choice voting is often oversold, oftentimes by people who don't realize that they're overselling it. So people are often told that if your favorite can't win, your next choice will be counted. They're told that it's safe to vote your conscience, that your vote won't be wasted, that it's easy, that the winner has a true majority, that it's non-polarizing, and that it breaks two-party domination. And all of these claims are either false or overstated. So I don't know if I should go through each of these one by one. It can get a little bit complex. I would say, and it doesn't show this on this presentation, but I really recommend a website called rcvchangedalaska.com that was created by one of our staff members at Equal Vote. And it goes through a really important Alaska election where Peltola, Begich, and Palin were on the ballot. And there was a ranked choice voting election, and there was vote splitting in that election. And so contrary to popular belief, ranked choice voting does have vote splitting at times. And so that website really clearly goes through and kind of explains why these claims are not accurate. I think it would be too much in this presentation for me to go through it step by step, but if you want to go to rcvchangedalaska.com, you can dig into it.
Is there like you say that RCV doesn't break the two-party domination? Why wouldn't it? Because to me, it seems like it would. How would you?
Yeah,
Why
so
do y'all say it doesn't?
yeah, so as an example, I won't go into detail about the election, but that election that I was talking about, where it was Begich, Peltola, and Palin in the race, Begich was eliminated first of those three, and then it was Palin versus Peltola, and ultimately Peltola won. But the problem is she wasn't the candidate that would win head-to-head over all the other candidates. That was actually Begich, who was eliminated early. So Palin was actually the spoiler in this election. Because she was in the race, it caused Begich to lose. If it had been just Begich versus Peltola, Begich would have won. So Palin acted as the spoiler, and as a consequence, in the following election, both the Democrats and the Republicans in Alaska started to clamp down on letting their members run multiple candidates in the same race. There was a lot of discouragement of that because they started to realize, in my opinion, that it wasn't safe to run multiple candidates. And so it devolves over time, just the same way that standard choose one voting devolves over time to two parties, because people start to understand either intuitively or mathematically that it's not safe.
Okay.
So this is an example of how ranked choice voting results are published, and we just share this example to show that if you have a lot of rounds, it can get very complicated. So this is an example of a ranked choice voting election in Oakland where there were 10 rounds, and they're going through, these are the number of votes, these were what was transferred, and so on all the way to the end. And then down here at the bottom, you can see exhausted ballots in these gray lines here. So some of the ballots didn't make it to the end, and it's just very complicated sometimes, especially if there's a lot of candidates. In this particular election, almost 14,000 ballots were exhausted by the final round. That means they were not counted in the final round. And on average, in ranked choice voting elections, we see about 10% of ballots exhausted. Usually that's because the voter didn't rank all of the candidates that they would have needed to. And sometimes they're not allowed to. So if there's 10 candidates in the race, but you're only allowed 5 rankings, then you might not have any choice, and by the time it gets to that round, your ballot's already gone. So that's one of the problems we have with ranked choice voting. So there are multiple different ways to tally a ranked ballot. Originally, when ranked voting was first invented, long time ago, they picked the candidate that was preferred head-to-head over all others. The reason why that didn't really stick around, and that's known as Condorcet voting or ranked robin, it didn't really stick because it's a little difficult to tally, especially if you don't have machines to do it. So around 150 years ago, instant runoff voting, aka ranked choice voting, was proposed as a workaround to make the counting easier, and you can do it by physically passing the ballots around. But it doesn't quite lead to representative outcomes. In ranked choice voting, the top choice for each voter is counted, and the votes transfer if possible when the candidate is eliminated, but most of the rankings that are given are not counted. So most of that data that's on the ballot actually gets kind of lost to the wind. So you might have a lot of expressiveness in filling out the ballot, but most of that information that you're putting down will never actually be looked at in a ranked choice voting election. And because you're selectively ignoring ballot data, it can skew the results. So for some voters, you're looking at multiple rankings. For some voters, you're only looking at 1 or 2 rankings. And so it doesn't give people equal footing. And the candidate which is preferred over all others can lose in a ranked choice voting election. And in particular, the more candidates there are in the race, the more likely a ranked choice voting election is to fail. So it discourages multiple candidates from running. So this is that same graphic again, just to drive home that when voters can only support one candidate or one candidate at a time, then vote splitting can allow a candidate who is opposed by the majority to win. And ranked choice voting is just like a series of choose one elections where you're having different rounds of choose one elections. So you can have vote splitting in any round. So what are the methods that eliminate vote splitting? Star voting, which is our preferred method that we advocate for. We also support ranked robin. There's a couple of organizations that are working on that. There's approval voting. If you're interested in that, you can follow the Center for Election Science. They advocate for that primarily. But we think all of these voting methods are great, and we encourage people to try them in their organizations, or if you want to advocate for it in your city. As we've discussed, the choose one voting method and ranked choice voting do not eliminate vote splitting. In order to eliminate vote splitting, you have to allow voters to support as many candidates as you like, allow voters to support candidates equally, and you have to count all of the ballot data in the tally. So I mentioned earlier that there's some simulations that look at these voting methods. This is voter satisfaction efficiency, and this was one of the first simulations that was run on this. You can see that star voting does really well, given a lot of different potential strategies that voters might use. Approval voting does very well as well. Ranked choice voting, we're kind of slipping a little bit. And then all the way down to plurality voting, which is not good. And this is, I think, one of the more important graphics. So if you only take away one graphic, this is the one I think to think about. So our current voting method, the accuracy declines dramatically when you have more than two candidates. So on the left side of this graph, you can see they're all 100% accurate. All these different voting methods are 100% accurate when you only have two candidates in the race. But then when you add a third candidate, plurality voting dramatically drops in its accuracy. And these other voting methods also drop in accuracy. And even star voting, as you can see, there is a slight drop in accuracy. But it's a much more stable, more consistent accuracy for star voting than for these other voting methods. And importantly, that light blue line indicates plurality voting with a top two runoff. And you can see that's almost as good as ranked choice voting. So if your city or county already uses a top two runoff, then upgrading to ranked choice voting or IRV is not going to give you that much of a boost. But upgrading to star voting is going to be a tremendous boost to accuracy in that election. Ranked choice voting uses a ranked ballot, but it only counts one ranking per round. So it's very similar to the way we do things now. And when there's three or more competitive candidates, then ranked choice voting deteriorates significantly. The more viable candidates there are, the more likely unrepresentative outcomes are to occur. So that's really important because we want to encourage people to run. I won't go into this too much, but Brian, I'll share this slide deck with you in case you want to share it with anybody who's interested. But this just goes through different ways of measuring voting methods. Choose one. Plurality voting on the left has a lot of problems, and star voting on the right does really well in these measurements. And that's my presentation. So, if you want to learn more, you can go to equal.vote. We also have a website, starvoting.org, where you can learn more specifically about star voting. And I think a really fun way to experience these voting methods is to go to bettervoting.com, which is our website where you can create a star voting poll. You can create an approval voting poll. I think you can do ranked robin there as well, and try them out and compare them to each other, see how they feel. You can even do some voting methods we don't like there. You can do a choose one ballot just to compare and see how that feels and how it's different. So I encourage people to go and check out bettervoting.com. You can also use it for your organization's elections. If you have a board at your company or your nonprofit, or if you just want to use it for day-to-day decision making. So sometimes I'll use it if, me and my siblings have a disagreement about, where we want to go for a hike this weekend, or if you have a book club and you're trying to decide on a book to vote on. This is a great tool for that. If you want to learn more about the in-depth stuff, you can go to equal.vote/accuracy. If you want to learn more about ranked choice voting and why we don't support it, equal.vote/beyond_RCV_zine. And if you want to sign up for our email list, go to starvoting.org/join. And that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much for going over. I know you've done this before, and I was hoping to get this out to our members, and I was never able to get a copy of it. So I'm glad you were able to redo it again, because I was always a big supporter of the ranked choice voting. And after seeing this, I actually flip now, and I'm like, all right, that's probably the better route to go, because like, for instance, here in Roanoke, we had more people stay home during the last presidential election than come out and vote. And any way that we can get citizens to come out and feel that their voice is going to be heard, I think we need to explore that option.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think there's definitely a ranked choice voting to star voting pipeline where, I started out as a ranked choice voting supporter as well, and that's really common in our organization. We hear that story a lot of people who first heard about ranked choice voting, dug into it a little bit more, did some research, and then came to the conclusion that it actually doesn't achieve the things that it purports to. So, but the good news is that there are things that can do that. So we're excited to share them.
Right. I do have a couple questions. I'm going to try to see if, because I know you went over a lot of stuff, and so hopefully, I don't believe you've discussed it. I don't even know if you might have an answer or not. Is there, with the star voting system, how does it encourage positive campaigning over negative attacks?
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. One of the ways that it does that is, so if you think about the ballot where you're scoring candidates on a scale of 0 to 5. Now, for example, you might have heard the news recently where Katie Porter got into trouble because she was on a news show and she was asked, what are you going to do to get Trump supporters to, how are you going to get their support? And she said, I don't need their support. And she's right. In a choose one voting method, at least in the primary in California, she doesn't need to care about them at all. But if you're using a 5-star ballot, she's going to want to get as high a score as possible from as many voters as possible. So obviously she wants her base to give her 5 stars, but even the people that maybe don't like her that much, she's going to want them to at least give her 1 or 2 stars rather than 0. So she's incentivized to appeal to a broad swath of voters and not just her base and her funders. And then similarly, if she has another similar candidate that they want to campaign together, they can go knocking on doors together and say, hey, you can give me 5 stars and give my friend 4, or give us both 5 stars, or give them 5 and give me 4. So you can support your fellow candidates that are ideologically similar, and there's no risk of vote splitting. So you don't have to be slinging mud. Now, you might still want to criticize some of the other candidates if you have things to criticize about them, but it's less of a all or nothing kind of competition.
Right. Okay. Well, that makes it. I didn't ever thought of actually campaigning with the other candidate, because you would be
Right.
able to say, give us both 5 stars, and you're not
Yeah.
either way.
Yeah, and
Uh,
that's something we do see that in ranked choice voting elections. So we do like to give credit to ranked choice voting when it does things well, and we have seen that where candidates will campaign together and say, hey, please rank us both highly, and there is some incentive to encourage that. So that
right.
is a positive thing.
What software or ballot design changes are needed to implement star voting in a local election? Would it be very costly?
I don't believe so. And I'm not an expert on ballot machines. And part of the problem is that every different county uses different machines and different vendors. My understanding is that it's only a software update that's needed, not a hardware update for star voting. I don't think that's always true for ranked choice voting. I don't want to speak too much about this because I'm not super familiar with it, but that's my understanding, is that it would just be a simple software update.
Okay. Let's see. What are any main arguments against star voting that you've heard, such as voter fatigue from scoring multiple candidates, or maybe too many candidates? People might complain about that. Is there any complaints that y'all ever hear?
Yeah, I think you're right on the money that there is a fear of fatigue. If there's too many candidates, then you have to research all these candidates. For that reason, we don't necessarily advocate for eliminating the primary election. There might be times when you do want to eliminate the primary in order to save money. But if you have a big city that typically has a lot of candidates running, you might want to still hold a primary and whittle your candidates down to, say, like the top 4 or 5, and then send those 4 or 5 to the general election and have voters vote on it. And again, you can use star voting in both elections. So that might help with some of that. Ultimately, if you don't have time to research all the candidates, you can leave blank the ones you don't know about, and that will give them a score of 0. And so, it's effectively saying, I don't know enough about this candidate to want to give them any support. So that's another way that a voter can do that. In the end, I think it's better to have more candidates, and the ones that are able to get out in the news and do their door knocking and that kind of stuff, they're the ones that are going to get votes. So I think it's okay, but it can be daunting, especially the first time that you use an alternative voting method. Like here in Portland, we recently just started using ranked choice voting, and they allow up to 6 rankings. And so there was this big grid of bubbles, and people did find that a bit intimidating. But I think you also find that as people get used to any new voting method, then it doesn't feel so daunting after that first election. So there's a bit of a learning curve, and you want to educate people on what the changes are.
Right. Does star voting disproportionately benefit moderate candidates over ideological ones? And is that a pro or a con?
So the way that we talk about it is that star voting levels the playing field. So it doesn't disproportionately benefit polarizing candidates like our current voting method does, but it evens it out so that candidates that are in the middle have as much chance as candidates on either side. And ultimately what we're looking for is what candidate is at the center of public opinion. So that doesn't necessarily mean the center of the political spectrum. That just means in that particular city, for the issues that those particular voters are concerned about, which candidate best serves the most people the best. So you can call that to the center if you want, but it's not centrist in the sense of a political spectrum necessarily. But it can be. It just depends on the voters.
Right. And final question that I have is, what legal or constitutional hurdles must be overcome to adopt the star voting? And this, is that just a state by state case, or is it something else anymore? Or do you know?
Yeah, so we've, been looking at all the constitutions around the country, and we're not lawyers that are studying this, but based off of our analysis of those constitutions, we believe that star voting is constitutional in all 50 states, which is not true of ranked choice voting. So that's very encouraging, and it really aids in our efforts to get this implemented at a large scale. And the other nice thing about star voting is it scales really well, because you can do it at a local level, but even if you do it at a state level or larger, you're always using addition. So because you're summing the data, as opposed to ranked choice voting where you have an algorithm where you're like passing ballots around, when you're summing the data, you can tabulate locally and then send that data to a central location where they can aggregate the data, as opposed to with ranked choice voting where you have to send all the data to that central location and have it tabulated centrally. So that makes ranked choice voting harder to scale up, because if you think about like a national election, we would all be sending our ballot data to Washington, D.C., where it would run through the tallying. Whereas with star voting, we could have our data tallied locally, send that subtotal to Washington, D.C., and then they aggregate it. So, so even if you're implementing it in pieces, you can sum them together, and it just kind of works better that way.
All right. All right. Well, I'm done with all my questions. I think you've explained the 5-star voting method very well. I think it's a better option than ranked choice voting. I mean, you sold me on it the last time, and myself and Andy, who was here, we both actually liked the system a lot better. So hopefully we can get the message out there and more people can learn about it, because like I said, so many people staying home is not a good thing. We need to get them individuals out feeling that their vote will be heard, because my vote's never heard, since I usually vote the Libertarian. Like Chase Oliver got my vote, and that was the end of it, So I have to accept what they hand us from Washington and Richmond and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
So,
and a huge number of people don't vote for that exact reason. They feel like it doesn't matter, so why should I bother? And if we can change that, if we can make people know that your vote is going to be counted, it's going to matter, it's going to make a difference in the result, then I think we can get more people out there.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you again, and good luck out there in Oregon. And I hopefully we'll see some type of success with this in the near future. All right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.